You do for America. You know that. Remember how Trump made fun of your wife, and then you go become best friends with Trump? I know, but why do you do that? You go become best friends with Trump after he makes fun of you and your wife. Why do you do that?
I understand you don't want to defend Texas, and you don't want to.
No, see, I do love America. See, you don't. You care more about the border between Ukraine and Russia than you care about the border between Texas and Mexico. Why is that? Why do you care about that?
We're done.
I know, but why are you a globalist? You're a globalist, bud. You know it, Ted. Hey, Teddy, you're a globalist. You're a globalist, Ted. You know that, bud, and that's why you're a coward and a liar, and you know that, and I know that, and that's why you're afraid to stand up for it. When people were freezing and dying, you were in Cancun, Mexico. You remember that? You remember when you're at the all-inclusive buffet when people were freezing? No, but do you remember that, Ted, when everybody was freezing? Remember that, when people were dying? What were you doing?
Good is Senator Ted Cruz doing what he does best, get owned by literally everyone. In that case, apparently a right-winger. Ted Cruz tried to sort of brush off the criticism, like implying that this guy was a lefty, but no, and it's not impossible that he could have been pretending to be a right-winger, but based on this rhetoric, talking about the border and calling him a globalist because Ted Cruz wanted to aid Ukraine in some fashion, I don't know. That was enough for him to attack Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz really didn't have anything to respond to that. About the claims about Trump, which are totally accurate. He did debase himself for Donald Trump after Trump mocked him and his family, and him fleeing during that horrific power outage in Texas when the grid collapsed. He had no response to that. He had no response to really anything. He just sat there looking like an idiot. Now, some of what the guy was saying is absolutely crazy. Again, the idea that Ted Cruz becomes a globalist when he supports military aid to Ukraine, but presumably that same right winger doesn't think that like us selling tons of weapons to Saudi Arabia makes Donald Trump a globalist. I don't know. It's very opportunistic the way that they deploy that phrase, by the way. In any event, Ted Cruz decided to go to that event. He should have known he was going to face some of this from the even crazier right.
I passed McCain. Look at I passed McCain right here. You're a rhino. You're a globalist. You're a globalist rhino. You're a globalist rhino. Kid, you're a globalist rhino. I passed McCain. I passed McCain. I passed McCain. You're a globalist rhino. You're a globalist rhino.
So that was Representative Dan Crenshaw being accosted this weekend by a right wing. I guess he would probably say activist, but honestly, at this point, what's the difference between a conservative activist, a member of Congress, a figure in the media? They all do and say the exact same thing, but it was a crazy person who accosted him. And he had this one opportunity on film to really stick it to Dan Crenshaw. And so he just repeated over and over again, eye patch McCain and globalist rhino. Over and over. That was all he had. I guess he hadn't prepped much. I don't know. Bear in mind the eye patch McCain. That is a term for Crenshaw that was coined by Tucker Carlson after he decided that it was okay to mock the fact that Dan Crenshaw wears an eye patch. Back before he decided, Tucker Carlson, that he wanted to attack him, he attacked Pete Davidson for making a joke about the eye patch. That was unacceptable, but when Tucker Carlson himself wanted to do it and get that to be a thing that the right does now, that's perfectly acceptable. But Francesca, this is the site of, the Republicans were gathering in Texas there, and this is the sort of person who I guess comes to those events to just harass and accost and get a little bit physical. Let's keep it real with the congressman and his entourage.
Yeah, I mean, he had a camera, so definitely member of the media. As we now we're now all members of the media with our camera phones. No, I think it's really important that the person who coined that phrase, eye patch McCain, is not someone from the left. The person he got mad at was a comedian, so let's put that aside for initially calling out his eye patch. But generally, when it comes to Greg Abbott in a wheelchair, well, that is not a line of attack. Number one, because we're not ableist, and number two, because there's a million other reasons to attack people like Dan Crenshaw and Governor Greg Abbott. Like this is what we do. We generally like try to rise above and focus on issues. And of course, it is really, really wrong to make fun of someone's disability. But if it's Tucker Carlson, well, then it's all gravy. And as long as he can still have Dan on his show occasionally, and Crenshaw doesn't want to call that out. This was probably just a one-time thing. And I think you're gonna see, instead of, if this were someone from the left, he'd freak out about it, tweet about it, go insane about it, go ape about it. But no. Yeah. Let's just pretend it never happened.
They just beat her up really bad. And I think it was just appalling. That's all they could come up with. And the main thing they did this for is so they could get TV.
I'm not going to dispute what you said, because I think you described it accurately, but that doesn't apply to me, or you didn't hear.
Well, you're right. Excuse me.
Durbin complimented me.
Excuse me, Senator. You are the head of the Senate. You're the oldest person there. You've been there 50 years. I mean, it's unbelievable what you've done for Iowa in the past. I have voted for you in the past. And now it's getting to the time where I think you're not for the people, you're more for the party.
So that right there was a voter at just a couple of weeks ago, one of these local town halls with Senator Chuck Grassley, really laying into them over the way that the Republicans have handled the nomination hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson. Obviously, we've done a lot of coverage of it. You're probably familiar with the threat of QAnon bait that's gone through it, insane attacks over the definition of women and critical race theory. Basically, the stuff that the Republicans are interested in that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Ketanji Brown Jackson, her history, or what position she would hold on the court, but they just wanted to make it about that. And it turns out it's frustrated a lot of people, including many Republicans, and polls back up what you saw in that video. More than half, 52% of respondents disproved of how Republican senators handled the process. About half, just exactly half that number actually approved of it. And these, like, you might think, well, yeah, but people are mad about Congress all the time. They don't like anything that they do. What does that really say? Well, those numbers are the reverse of how people viewed senators' handling of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. They weren't nearly as bothered by the way those were handled, even though they were insane, because people felt, rightfully so, that it was justified that people were asking hard questions of the beer guy